Hello, and thanks for joining us for this episode of the People, Place and Nature podcast. In this episode, we have award-winning scientist, Dr. Dan Stewart. But first, we have to say a big thank you to our sponsor, Vectorworks. Make sustainability a priority throughout the design process with a suite of tools built specifically for landscape architecture and design. Vectorworks gives you the freedom to follow your imagination wherever it may lead, with remarkably flexible software that integrates BIM for landscape and GIS workflows. Sketch, model, and document in a single tool with the world's most design-centric BIM solution. Discover Vectorworks' landmark and design without limits. Visit vectorworks.net to learn more. So I'm really excited to be here today. It's a podcast I've been looking forward to doing for a long time with Dr. Dan. Me and Dan go way back. We went to school together.
We do, yeah.
Dan was my head boy.
Yeah,
and
I was.
I think we had a very different approach to school at the time. And we went to quite an interesting school. It's quite surprising thinking back as to where we're both sat now. Actually, our school wasn't particularly great, I would say, in terms of some of the education we had and our behaviour. So it's interesting to see how we've both sort of developed and, sort of, well, I don't want to speak, I'm speaking for you mainly, but flourished. Some of the things you're doing are absolutely incredible. And it's really interesting to see and would love to know more, and I'm sure other people would. So really, really happy to have you on.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. And like, as you say, it's amazing that we've kind of gone in our separate directions after school. And I'm actually really pleased that we've sort of come full circle, and now we're able to sit here and talk about what we're doing with our lives, how we're trying to tackle issues that we perceive in the world in our own different ways and our own different industries. So I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
No, well, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. So tell us a bit more about what you do, because you're working in carbon dioxide utilization.
I am, yes.
Which is not something I'd ever heard of before catching up with you the other day. So I don't know a great deal about this subject area, but it seems really, really interesting and very topical. So
yeah, absolutely. So all of this work stemmed from my PhD, actually. So from school, I went and did a master's degree in chemistry at the University of Southampton. I then shamefully didn't apply for any jobs when I came out of uni, and I worked in recruitment for just short of a year. And during that time I applied to go back to Southampton and start a PhD. And that at the time didn't necessarily focus on carbon dioxide, but when I sat down with my supervisor in sort of my interview as such, he's a professor of catalysis, so he designs structures, solid state structures most notably, in order to make industrial processes more sustainable. So the design, synthesis, manipulation. And we sat down and we decided that we were going to have a crack at making something which can turn carbon dioxide into something useful. And this is really where it all stemmed from. So at the moment I am a research fellow, having completed my PhD in June last year. And I am focusing on specific processes which turn carbon dioxide into something useful. So at the moment we're focusing on the production of plastic feedstocks. And now I know everyone hears plastics and they go, why would we want to turn carbon dioxide into that? But actually plastics represent a vast, vast industry. And actually by utilising CO2 in this way, we can make plastics more sustainable, greener, biodegradable. So yeah, that's kind of like a real whirlwind tour of sort of the last 8-9 years, and how I've managed to find myself in carbon dioxide utilisation.
Ah, interesting. So and you spent a lot of time in America as well, didn't you?
I spent 6 months in America. I lived in Atlanta in the 4th year of university. That was part of my placement study. I went to Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech. And yeah, that actually has nothing to do with what I do now. I was focusing on materials that shrink when you heat them up, in a nutshell. But yeah, I lived out there. That was an awesome 6 months. I learned a lot. I was doing essentially PhD work in my undergrad. So that has actually set me up quite nicely for the PhD. I just didn't quite know it at the time. But that was great fun, absolutely amazing.
So how have you been? So is your work a follow-on from the PhD then, or is it quite separate? What you're doing now?
Yeah, so everything we're doing now is in the build-up to our imminent spin-out, ViridiCO2. We found out sort of 6 months into my PhD that we'd found a catalyst that is able to transform carbon dioxide very, very efficiently compared to everything else that is on the market at the moment.
Oh, wow.
We realised its potential to provide a bit of a game changer to the chemical industry, and we ran with it. It's not something you get to do very often, even for the professors out there, I'd say.
Yeah.
They don't get to necessarily see their research legacy turn into an applied process within industry, and I had that opportunity sort of a year into my PhD. So we took it, we developed it over the next 3 years. It was sort of my baby. And we filed patents to protect it, and now we're in the process of turning it into a commercial proposition. And we are imminently spinning within the next month or two.
Oh, wow. So a very quick turnaround then.
Yeah, it's been crazy how quick we've moved, actually. I mean, there's 3.5 years worth of work behind it. I have so many lab books with so much data in, which proves that we're doing what we say we can do. But actually, the recognition and the interest we're getting from the chemical industry, from investors, from key stakeholders has been phenomenal, and it's really been a driver behind how quickly we're able to bring this to market. We were selected to be part of the Royal Society of Chemistry's Emerging Technology competition last year, very prestigious competition, and we won.
Oh, wow.
We were named finalist, and me and my supervisor, I call him my supervisor, Professor Robert Raja. He's my co-founder now.
Yeah.
He was my PhD supervisor. He's a colleague. We founded the company together. I just find it hard to get out of the he's my supervisor kind of lingo as such. But we were gobsmacked when we were named as a finalist, and then when we were announced winner, oh, it's amazing. And that's done wonders for us. Recognition from the Royal Society of Chemistry, who is an international body, has really promoted us. And then we won a key bit of funding from the UK government, from UKRI. Innovate UK have given us £300,000 to develop the technology, develop the commercial potential of ViridiCO2, and that is what's supporting us over the next 12 months to bring this to market.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So even, again, in such a short time to achieve so many things is pretty impressive. I didn't know any of that.
No,
so
honestly,
that's really amazing to hear. Congratulations, deserve it.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, we've had immense support throughout all of this. I've actually been quite blown away with, one, the team that I have around me that we've built, but also the support from people like the Royal Society of Chemistry, from UKRI. I was selected to do a innovation to commercialisation of university research program, which is called iCure. They take university research and essentially give you 3 months of funding to validate the technology in the wider industry. Essentially 3 months of calling anybody who will talk to me under the guise of being a university researcher rather than a salesman.
Yeah.
But that was key to our developing of a business model and how we're actually going to bring this to market. And everyone has sort of weighed in, given us little bits of advice. It's amazing the ecosystem that I've sort of found myself in, people just willing to help sort of young entrepreneurs, which I still find difficult to call myself. I still consider myself to be like a science nerd. Science nerd that's trying to just make a little bit of a difference in the world.
Yeah.
And yeah, so to have finished my PhD less than 12 months ago and be diving into a spin out as the CEO is a crazy fast journey. Every day is really hands-on, especially as I'm sort of at the moment kind of doing everything. We do research. We've got other projects as well. We're trying to sort out funding. We're trying to sort out hiring people. Yeah, but it's great fun, and I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, no, it sounds it. Yeah, it's really impressive. So I wanted to ask you as well about this, because I don't understand this subject particularly well. So what is the difference between carbon capture and utilization? So Because I see that it's slightly two different things, but essentially, I guess, capturing the carbon and utilising it is a form of carbon capture. Is that correct?
Yes, to a degree. So really, carbon dioxide is usually considered in two different sort of forms, the technology. So you have carbon capture storage and you have carbon capture utilization. So carbon capture storage are the techniques that people probably know most about. So sequestration, usually pumping all the CO2 back in under the North Sea somewhere, filling depleted oil fields. And actually the UK government has spent 168 million on sequestration and storage techniques. But the problem with them is it's finite. So what happens once we filled all the oil fields? So really all of the impetus now is to develop utilization technologies and something that can turn carbon dioxide into something useful, because we have so much of it. It's cheap, non-toxic, it's a fantastic chemical feedstock, but the processes just aren't quite there to use it at scale. But with that, there's also, as you've identified, the utilization stage, but there's also the capture stage. So carbon capture utilization. Now, ViridiCO2 is very much the latter. We are the utilization step. We're not going to be sort of flailing anything around in the air to capture the carbon dioxide and bring it in. Direct air capture is a really hot topic at the moment. Personally, I think direct air capture is a little way off yet, but what is fantastic to see is the big business people of the world, the big CEOs, Elon Musk, sort of getting behind it and really trying to bring attention and funding towards it. But if you're capturing it, you've got to do something with it. So that's where we come in. The company is going to focus primarily on avoiding CO2 being released in the first place. So what we want to do is ViridiCO2 is going to deliver a solution where chemical manufacturers can sort of redirect their CO2 emissions from a chemical process, from a power plant, whatever, and redirect it into the chemical reactor, where you directly replace fossil fuels. So we're reducing fossil fuel reliance in this step as well. And that will mix with our technology, and we will produce chemical products which are direct replacements for some of the ones we see today. And I mean, they're everywhere. So that's kind of the idea. It's a point source redirection rather than a capture technology. But ultimately, the goal is the same. It's to reduce CO2 emissions and really try and make sure that we hit global climate targets.
So it's really a range of different services it's offering. Because when you think of, so carbon capture is kind of the umbrella term, I guess, isn't it, for both systems, as you've explained. But when I think of carbon capture, I think primarily of, concrete, like there's these new sort of concrete options where they store carbon, cutting trees down and using timber, because obviously they're absorbing carbon as they grow. Those sort of things, you don't really think of it being used in some sort of process. Because I think there's kind of this view that it's, especially to laymen like me, it's kind of just something that's there that's not really usable. So it's interesting to know that it is usable and how it can be used. So what sort of products do you think it will be used to create? Is it primarily plastics, or are there other things it will be used for too?
So there's a lot of amazing technology coming out now where people are using carbon dioxide to make products like cement. The people are able to sequester CO2 into the cements. There are people who are turning carbon dioxide into the materials that go into PET, so into clothing, into clothing fibres, and they use water and electricity to do that. Whereas what we're trying to do is just use really low temperatures and pressures. We add in our powder, which is really the heart of the technology, and you just add the CO2 and the reduced amount of fossil fuel to produce generally plastics to start with. However, we have scope to start making other kind of materials. So there's an opportunity for us to make the electrolytes for batteries.
Oh, wow.
So every battery will have an electrolyte, and we're able to make them. And the battery industry is always getting bigger, electric cars. But we're also able to start moving into other important chemicals as well. So those that go into clothing, like nylons. There are a number of monomers that end up in different types of plastics. So there's actually a lot of areas that we're able to impact with this. And actually, another aspect for us that's really important is there are two ways we can apply our technology. There is the providing a process to manufacturers who make chemicals. And what we do is we are enabling them to produce chemicals using CO2. But also we're able to impact those founding industries like steel and cement, the guys who are usually the worst for CO2 emissions: steel, cement, iron. And what we can do is use their waste CO2. So they produce steel or cement, they produce a load of emissions in doing that. They can't get around it in some of those processes. So what we do is redirect that CO2 that would otherwise end up in the atmosphere, and we make products from them. So it's a way of reducing their CO2 emissions, but to make something which has value and can benefit sort of you and I.
So these things that are being produced, let's say plastics, so earlier you were saying, are they biodegradable as well, potentially?
Yeah.
Is there still a long way to go where some, is it one of these, because some of the biodegradable plastics, they are biodegradable, which is better than most plastic, but actually they don't meet the time frames for things like composting and these other systems. So whilst they kind of come across as, and they definitely are a better option, there's still a lot of problems where actually they're still going to landfill or still being incinerated.
Yeah.
So, do you know anything about sort of time frames on things like that?
I couldn't comment on the time frames behind it, but what's really interesting about the CO2 versions of these plastics is by inserting carbon dioxide, you introduce a chemical unit in the backbone of the polymer that enables the plastic at the end of its life to be either biodegraded or by chemically recycling techniques. So it actually opens up a way to recycle the plastics later on. So you can break them down into their constituent parts and then reform them later into something else. Now it's really important to highlight here that actually there's loads of different levels and definitions of biodegradability, and that's probably a whole other podcast on its own with someone who's a greater expert than I. But really what we're allowing is a process to recycle these plastics later in its life, where at the moment it simply isn't possible. So the plastics at the moment that are used generally are either burnt for energy recovery, which obviously you're creating CO2 doing that, or they just end up in a landfill and taking up space.
Yeah. So how does that work with things? Because obviously, again, layman here, a lot of plastics are recycled and are reused and broken down, but obviously I know that some of those degrade over time, so you can only reuse them an X amount of times, and then essentially they end up having to go to landfill. So is this going to open up the opportunity for more of these plastics that typically go to landfill to avoid landfill completely? Is it kind of removing that kind of group of plastics or plastics that reach the end of their lives?
So the kind of plastics you're referring to are sort of your classic polypropylenes, polyethylenes, and they are widely recycled. And they will go through certain recycling processes, but as you say, as soon as you begin to move away from the virgin plastic, as they're described, that is a fresh plastic made from fossil fuels, from oil, then you begin to lose the physical properties which are so advantageous for plastics. Now what we're trying to do is we're starting off with the feedstock materials for polyurethanes. Now polyurethanes are not recycled at the moment. They find themselves in landfill or are burnt. So we're improving that plastic first, and then it is our hope to be able to either replace those very common plastics like polypropylene, polyethylene, with the CO2 based versions. So we reduce the amount of fossil fuels required for those, and we also design into the plastic a way of chemically recycling it. Now I mean, there's no saying that after so many iterations of recycling we're going to be able to get back to the perfect virgin plastic again, but it is certainly a more sustainable process that we're exploring and we're very keen to explore.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. So polyurethanes, what type of sort of home products do you find them in at the moment?
Everything.
Everything?
Absolutely everything.
So basically nothing is particularly recyclable.
So yeah, honestly, polyurethanes range from like soft foams, that's sort of the classic thing. So
like
they're in
cling
your car
filmy type
seats.
stuff, is it?
Not cling film, no.
Not cling film. Shows how much I know.
Building insulation,
Okay.
the stuff you find in the roofing spaces or the expanding foams. They are typically polyurethanes. You also get coatings. They're polyurethane based. You get some paints, adhesives, elastomers. They're polyurethane based. So yeah, everything. When I went into really trying to understand fully the extent to which we could impact the plastics industry, it was honestly mind-blowing.
Astronomically.
Yeah. Polyurethanes, 40 million tons a year are used, and that's 40 million tons that are then not recycled. And as a percentage, there are approximately, I think, 380 million tons of plastics made every year globally. So it represents sort of nearly 10% of all of the plastics in the world.
Wow.
So if we're able to have an impact on that, then we're doing well.
Yeah, no, definitely. So with going back to carbon capture again, why, the question I have is obviously around cost and things like that, and whilst there's a really important technical aspect to this, a lot of people I think will look at this and go, well, actually surely we should have more trees, or we should just use less plastic. And from my perspective, being more involved in that world of trees and the environment, is, I told you we'd be joined by a peacock at some point, is that actually there's not the space to put a lot of these things. The world has changed significantly from when it was all virgin forest and heavily wooded landscape. There is, don't get me wrong, there's massive opportunity to improve things, but actually there's so many systems that are in conflict now. Look at urban areas, look at agriculture. Unless we can shift massively to more like agroforestry systems, increased tree cover is going to be quite difficult. At a massive scale, at least in a short period of time that we kind of need to make these changes. So do you have any idea on, again, back to timeframes as well, what's your opinion on this stacking up compared to other systems? And what do you think about it in cost-wise? Do you think it's going to be economically viable? I mean, obviously this is what you're looking at the moment, and it sounds like it is, but how much have you looked into that?
Yeah, so I'll touch on the trees things first. I'm a big advocate for sort of planting trees. Unfortunately, as you've identified, there are so many other pressures on the globe regarding space, population increasing, having land to grow crops on to feed that growing population. So as much as I'd love to see trees replanted everywhere, it's not that easy. And this is why it's really important to have other carbon dioxide utilization methods that we can use. There's plenty of CO2 out there to use up. So it needs to be a really good balance across the board for all the technologies and obviously the agriculture side as well.
That's it. Well, I think that's a really, really important point. And to be clear, we're not talking about not planting trees. It's just that we need so many solutions and we have to tackle so many challenges. We have to have as many tools in our belt as we can to be able to do so. And and as diverse a solution we can get, everything we can resolve and tackle is a huge step forward.
Absolutely, and something at the heart of our next 12 months is analysing the full sustainability extent of our technology, which extends beyond carbon dioxide. So we'll be using certain analyses to make sure that ultimately the whole solution we're providing is not only carbon negative, because it would be otherwise a completely pointless business proposition, but ultimately is sustainable. And going back to what you were saying earlier about the sort of the economics side of things, that plays really heavily into that. So we want to make sure that we have a technology that is not only bringing value to the manufacturers that adopt it, and the company as well, so that we're able to continually develop this technology and keep providing solutions, which ultimately is my hope will play a pivotal role in the entire globe achieving their net zero emission targets. But will also be highly considerate of the sustainability aspects as well. And I think that is one of the things that's so nice about us being able to come back together and discuss what we're doing. Because I am no expert at all in sort of the agriculture side of things. And it's really important that there is this synergetic relationship between all of the branches of science to make sure we have a solution that is the best case for everything. And it's not one so heavily weighted compared to another.
Yeah, great way of putting it. So is there anything, in terms of funding, obviously you're going to sponsors and things, not sponsors, sorry, investors. We're looking at sponsors. So how are you finding that process? Is it very difficult? Obviously, I think anyone who knows anything about the environment and the way things are going and sustainability, we've got to start tackling this. Just in terms of a lack of resources amongst anything else, as much as economics. And I know some things like being talked about very loosely. I don't think they're going to happen anytime soon, at least, around carbon taxes. Is there anything else that you think? Well, firstly, how are you getting on with investors? What's the sort of landscape there like? Are there a lot of people interested? And what else could be done by the government or otherwise to kind of help get these systems moving more quickly, getting installed more rapidly? Because obviously money's great, but there's always a lot of policy and other type of things going on in the background that actually hang it up more than money and cause things to take a long time to get through all the bureaucracy.
Yeah, it's a very interesting space to be in, because what's really encouraging is I think we're moving in the right direction. The fact that a lot of countries are committing to emission targets and there is positive direction. The other thing that's great to see is companies are very keen on sustainability. I would say from the experience that I've had in the last 6 months of reaching out to these big chemical companies is that sustainability is really high on the agenda. The corporate bottom line and the price is sort of the key driver, but second to that is sustainability. And that's great to see. From a spin out and an SME sort of viewpoint, I think there can always be more funding. I am very aware that a lot of my time is spent trying to make sure we have funds going forward. And that's not just me, that's every sort of business owner. What's encouraging is UKRI, the UK's research and innovation sort of funding body. They have now put into their funding criteria that all of their decisions have to consider sustainability. So that's really encouraging to see, and I think it's by 2025. I might need to double check that, but by 2025 all of the decisions will have a sustainability focus in mind as well. But equally, until the government tell chemical manufacturers that they need to stop producing X amount of emissions a year and really have consequences to that, I don't think we're going to see as quick a change as we want to see.
Yeah, you just end up people dragging their heels and doing things as they've always been done.
This technology is really trying to bring about a paradigm change in the way chemicals are made. These are established processes that have been used for decades, and we are trying to tell chemical manufacturers that they need to stop using them. Now, obviously it's a business, they have to make money, and that poses a risk to them. So, I mean, what I'd like to do is be able to discuss those risks, understand those risks, and build projects around chemical manufacturers' requirements in order to prove to them that this is viable. And everything I do at the moment is making sure I've got data which supports what I'm trying to say. We're going through a really big scaling process at the moment, trying to prove that we make it on higher numbers of grams rather than the really small amounts you classically see in research, and using that, being able to prove that we can do this. And there are companies that are very open to that, and I'm really encouraged by some of the guys we're working with already, who I can't name at the moment, but they are very keen to make the changes and really make their products more sustainable, because ultimately it has to happen. It has to happen.
It does.
Companies need to invest in innovation in order to make this happen, otherwise they're going to get stuck behind.
Yeah, but I mean the thing is, it seems to be a no-brainer, because of the sustainability aspect. If they are able to store carbon and we do start funding that, and there are going to be funding models coming out soon for that, and a lot of people are investing in carbon capture, to emit their own CO2. You know, some of the organisations I'm involved with, they're looking at emitting all of their carbon now. Various companies are doing it. This podcast will do it at some point when we have funds, but at the moment we don't. So you know, please do invest in the podcast. But you know, it's one of those where it's not that easy at the moment for people, especially starting up or with new businesses, no matter how, you know, green the ambitions are. But for some of these bigger companies, on the sustainability side, if they're able to make use of this and recycle things and use less fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are becoming more expensive, you know, it's clearly an investment in the future and cost saving down the line.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's a lot of economic drivers behind it. So as you say, fossil fuels cost a lot of money, and carbon dioxide is cheap.
Yeah.
So when I last looked, one of the fossil fuels that are used in our processes costs about 1,500 euros per tonne. And I think at the moment, carbon dioxide costs probably at worst 300 euros per tonne. Don't quote me on that, but it's a lot cheaper. So if they're able to implement processes which may have an initial capital expenditure, the economic value later on will pay off. So I do think that with the right technologies, and I'm hoping we are one of them, we will be able to provide not only sustainability value but also economic value to the big chemical manufacturers.
Yeah, it seems like you will. Seems like you're on the right track.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. Yeah, definitely. I think we all hope so. I think.
Yeah, no, it's really great space to be in at the moment. I really believe in it. When we started off this journey, we all identified that we have a really cool, promising bit of technology, but unless you can make it cost effective, you can produce it on scale, it does what you think it's going to do at the tons rather than the grams. There's no certainty behind it, but the more and more work we do on this, I do a lot of lab validation still when I have time, and every day I believe in it more and more and more. That we have the technology, we can do this, I've got the team around me to bring it in, and the interest ultimately. You mentioned earlier about how our sort of fundraising is going. We are just closing our seed round, so we have a lot of investors who are very interested. I've been very fortunate that I've been able to select the investors that I think will bring most value to the company, and they believe in us, and they provide the expertise that I don't have. So I can bring all the science, I can bring the know-how for the technology, but I don't know how to build a business. And I'm sure when you made your first company, it's a bit of a minefield, trying to understand everything, and you can probably get yourself in trouble if you don't comply with certain things that aren't immediately obvious. But the team I've got helps me handle that side. And yeah, I think we really have an opportunity, and we've been supported so far very well from the Royal Society of Chemistry, from Innovate UK, from our investors. And everything right now is looking really promising. We just have to keep pushing the innovation, keep ploughing away at making this a reality.
Oh yeah, again, do. How did you find setting up the business? You know, you said it was obviously a challenge in not knowing what you're doing, and you know, when you do, well, actually, it's partly why we set up our business. You know, me and my business partner for our landscape business, we was both working for companies, and we kind of decided that actually part of the reason we wanted to set the business up was to, you know, make those mistakes, learn what we could quicker, opposed to doing the more traditional route where, you know, you work at a company for a long time, you get experience, and then you set up on your own. We wanted to be able to sort of just take that jump, have to figure it out quickly, and we've been really lucky that we landed on our feet, and we actually, you know, we're both pretty competent, I like to think, with what we're doing, and we're now working with a huge range of other companies to help them deliver their projects and things as well. And we bring a different dynamic to what's been done in the past. We've been very fortunate there. But obviously, well, I set mine up just before lockdown and COVID hit, and we were very lucky again because we sort of sat there and we thought to ourselves, well, actually, do we need an office? Neither of us could really afford it. We had no money. You know, we literally had no money, so for months. So we just sort of had to, you know, muddle through as best we could, and we couldn't afford a lot of things. So we decided to think, okay, how do we become as modern as we can? Our office is really the future. I don't know. So we invested in a lot of things like Teams and Zoom and servers and all this type of thing prior to COVID. So we were completely prepared. And we actually weren't affected, which was brilliant because we actually haven't been affected at all by COVID. really, and a lot of everything we were doing was basically online or virtual based. So we were very fortunate there, but we still had that kind of 6 month, I think it was about 6 month window before COVID hit, to do a lot of the in-person meeting and things you still have to do, whereas you've had none of that.
Yeah, no, I'm really pleased that you were set up beforehand. I think I've been very fortunate. So when COVID first sort of shut everything down, I was actually writing up my thesis. So I'd already been working from home for about a month and a half. So when everyone was told that they had to work from home, it's like, I've been it. I've sat on my desk for the last month and a half. So timing wasn't awful in that respect. But in terms of the process to set the company up, it was a case of we were getting a lot of sort of recognition. So we won the Royal Society of Chemistry's Emerging Technology competition, and that gave us a real kind of foot in the door. I was speaking to a lot of people. I think by that point we'd decided on the company name. So I was telling people that we are ViridiCO2, but we hadn't actually incorporated yet. So the actual incorporation process was very easy for the £12 on Company's House. But everything around that now is just an area that I don't really know about. I've had an awful lot of assistance from the on-campus accelerator unit at the University of Southampton, Future Worlds, and the guys there are amazing. You're sort of handpicked to come onto their cohort. They give you training around sort of finances, all of that. I got it also with the iCure scheme. And they help you. And through that, we actually got our business advisor, Chris Spackman. And Chris is amazing. I've been working with Chris for about 13 months now. Never met him. Everything has been over Teams. The market validation phase that we did, all on Teams. Normally the way that program works is we get a budget and we fly all around the world. And we do all of it face-to-face meetings. And the goal of it is to have 100 meaningful conversations. And I honestly don't know how people do that without video technology, because I was sat at my desk for 14 hours a day talking to people about our promising technology. And I'm thinking, how do people do this when they've got to fly across the world? So I actually think it really helped having the video platforms. There's a lot of people who I haven't met yet. I haven't met our investors. We've brought in a veteran of the chemical industry as our chairman. I've not met him yet. But I guess what we are very fortunate in is that the labs at Southampton have always remained open to some degree, under very tight restrictions and precautions due to COVID, but we've managed to motor on in the background. So it's been an interesting time, but I don't really know how I would have done it in person. Honestly, I mean, I have no reference point though. This is my first company.
That's it. Well, it is interesting because when we started, as I said, we were lucky we managed to meet a lot of people, but you lose an inordinate amount of time.
Yes.
And there's a huge carbon impact traveling around all these places.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is a huge benefit to being able to do it on Zoom. The big problem is you can end up wasting equally as much time because everybody wants a Zoom. You know, every time someone wants a conversation, they want to have a Zoom. And whereas before you would have been at a conference and you've maybe had a bit of a catch up, but it's a bit more business-like. But again, that's also one of the benefits. It's a lot more human, I think. Things have become much more human with Zoom and Teams because you actually see into people's homes and their lives a bit more. You get the dog, running through the background or barking at the door. You get the kid come crying for something, and it kind of takes that edge off that I think it used to have.
Yeah,
which is really nice.
I think the one thing from a sort of research perspective for myself is I miss the coffee conversation. So actually, I never realised how much in the past I was able to sort of strike up conversation with people in different fields, different companies, whilst you're getting a coffee. And that's difficult to replicate with sort of the teams. I've been a part of multiple sort of webinars where they have tried to replicate it with kind of like a breakout room everyone can just drop into, but it's not the same. But I think you're right. Everyone's a bit zoomed out. But I still think it's going to play quite a big role in how we communicate. If you can save a flight across the pond to go see a potential client, which you've saved yourself 20 hours of flying, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree. I mean, there are some things you can't really replicate. As you said, you know, I think there is a really important part of human contact. I think the big thing that's missed is conferences. But a lot of people would say, oh, you just bloody have the conference online. Which you can, of course. But actually, I've been to conferences all over the world, and the most important bit is between the sessions.
Yeah,
the sessions themselves, a lot of the time, they're good, they're interesting, but actually you could have just stayed at home and watched it. But the people you meet in between tend to be where you make your connections, where things actually go forward, and you lose all of that, and that is the vital bit. That's where you meet people for new projects, new clients. You find out what's kind of really going on behind the scenes. And that definitely has suffered a really big blow. I mean, a lot of my things I was doing lately have been a lot of international work, and that's obviously taken a big hit. And you miss a lot of the collaborative discussion, because we would, for example, with our professional body, I would go and talk about what the UK's up to, where we're kind of going, and how we're approaching these challenges. And we quite often speak to a lot of the developing nations where they're going, actually, we really need to do this, but we don't have the resources. Is there a way we can tie in with you guys? Can we collaborate? And if we hadn't have been to these events, that never would have happened, because they come to you afterwards or in the break. And you might think, oh, they'll drop you an email, but people don't. They don't drop you an email, they come and tell you. And that you need to talk to them to be aware of it, to be able to plan for it. So a lot of the work we've done lately has been planning these systems that can be used for training or otherwise to reach this wider audience and make a bit more of an impact there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, moving forward, I think everyone's going to be really keen for that first conference. They're all going to jump on it.
That's it.
But yeah, some normality. Well, we're heading towards normality now.
Definitely.
I think it's
in the
good.
UK at least.
Yes, of course. Sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the other thing is as well, how did you take this route? Because we talked at the start, we both went to school together, we've both taken different routes, we've come full circle. So how did you end up taking the route you have done? What kind of inspired you to do that, and what led you down that path?
That's a really good question. I guess I've always had a love for science. I think through school, we grew up in the sort of the climate change era. It was always in the public eye. I remember it being in quite a few of our subjects at school. So we've grown up knowing about it. It's not like it's a new thing for us. So I think I've been somewhat inspired with that. And with the PhD, I had the opportunity to try and make a bit of a difference with that. I had no idea it was going to end up where it is now. And nor did I have any ideas that this is the way sort of life would take me. But slowly the opportunities have come up where we can start really trying to make a difference, and taking it to a company is the way that we can do that the quickest, I believe. Unfortunately, there's a lot of great technology out there, but if it's not scalable and not cost effective, it never comes to light. So that is the position that we decided to put ourselves in, like, oh, can we make this scalable? Can we make it cost effective? And when we decided we could, and we had a real opportunity here, it was go, go, go. It was obvious. And really scary at the same time. When you do a PhD, there's always this sort of monkey on your back as to whether you're going to have a crack at staying in academia. You've got to publish papers, you've got to generate novel research proposals, you build your reputation, but it's really hard. Really, really hard to do so, to get all the way to being a tenured professor. Of all the PhDs in the world, the percentage of who make it is tiny. And I think I decided fairly early on that I didn't fancy that. So it was, then you look into industry, and then actually this opportunity to, let's just make our own kind of company. So yeah, I'm very fortunate. We hit the right thing, the timing is right, we've had the right team around us. My co-founder, Robert, who's professor at University of Southampton, has been amazing at inspiring me to, one, be a better scientist and really push the quality of our work, but also in making sure I develop professionally. He's always provided opportunities. Robert hasn't founded a company himself, until this one. So where he can't add value necessarily on the commercial side, he's always directed me to people who can.
Yeah.
And we've made sure that we have a good balance in the team to achieve what we want to achieve. So I think that is what's kind of driven me to be here. I'm very thankful for everyone who's given time, advice, mentorship throughout this entire process, and it undoubtedly is how we've got here.
Yeah.
Because looking back, I think if you ask any PhD student, is it an easy ride? And a lot of people think, oh, PhD students, you're just a student, you just want to stay at university a bit longer. And I mean, you do reap the benefits of being at university, don't get me wrong, but it's a slog. It is 4 years of battling novel, innovative technology that a lot of the time doesn't work.
Yeah.
A lot of a PhD is failing, and that can take its toll physically and mentally when you're driving your own work. As I'm sure you know, like trying to drive your own company, and there being so much uncertainty around things, it can really kind of weigh you down.
Yeah, definitely.
No, I had a good ride in my PhD. A lot of the things that I did worked, hence being in the position that I'm in. But in our group, there are guys who put in 12-hour days because it's their work and they're passionate about it, and sometimes to the detriment of their own health. I think it's quite important to highlight that PhDs aren't just larking about. It's a tough ride, but it gives you a lot of skills which set you up for whatever you want to do.
Yeah. It's interesting as well to hear how, you know, you kind of just had that I'll just do it kind of attitude, which is kind of the attitude I have. You know, part of the reason why we're doing the podcast and some of the other projects I'm working on is I just kind of reached a point where I thought, actually, if I don't do this, no one's going to do it, or
Absolutely.
it's going to take too long. So we kind of just bit the bullet. Like with this, again, you know, we invested quite a lot in this, you know, funds-wise and time-wise, because we thought actually it's better to just go for it instead of, you know, waiting around, because you can wait around for years and things never happen, and you always regret it as well if you don't try. Again, same with our business. We thought, let's give it a go, see how it works out, and so far, you know, we're going from strength to strength, which is perfect. It's what you want. But it's, again, interesting the routes we took. So I actually dropped out of college after school because I hated school. I pretty much hated. I've always hated education, and I was never. We're quite different. You were much more well behaved than I was.
Well, I had my moments, I'm sure, if you ask some of the teachers.
That's it. But yeah, so I left school and then I dropped out. And then from there, I kind of didn't really know what to do. You know, I didn't really have. There was no particular area I had interest in. I wasn't interested in any of the subjects really. All I knew was I liked sort of chopping firewood and cutting trees down really. So I ended up doing a youth program for naughty children basically, which got me back into kind of conservation, and I did a lot of work with the wildlife trusts, and I really enjoyed it. You know, I did a lot of teamwork. I actually worked with a lot of university students that had come out of uni and didn't really know what to do or wanted to get some different skills, and I ended up kind of running teams when I was about 16 with uni students. So I managed to learn a lot from them as well, which was interesting. And then I went back to college and did forestry, which was great. Really enjoyed forestry. Cut down chainsaws, machines, cut down trees, bigger trees, quicker, you know, all that stuff. Destruction really was what I liked more than anything. But through the course, I found I really enjoyed the management side. And then I kind of went. I always wanted to do as much as I could to make a difference. Was I suppose the thing that drove me. And I was always thinking, okay, right, conservation, great, really nice, but actually someone's got to create these forests, someone's got to plant new trees. So that sort of led me to forestry. Then from there, I thought, well, actually, we need farmland, we need land to do it. And I worked on a farm for maybe 6 months, looking at that, and found all the challenges and issues there, and started looking at food production and things. Then I thought, well, actually, someone's got to come in and manage all of this again. So I went into project management and did a stint there and did an internship in project management. And during that time, I was working on some big projects like flood remediation schemes and things. And I found out about landscape architecture, and I thought, well, actually, that is probably what I'm most interested in. It's that high-level design, figuring out all these solutions for urban and rural, and kind of merging the two. So I went down that route and studied there. And then while studying that, I realised, well, actually, I've kind of got this rural kind of background. Actually, what I really need is more on the urban side. So I did a master's in landscape and urban design. So I've kind of got this myriad of, I'm definitely not an expert in any particular area, but it's given me a really interesting overview of what's going on in the environmental world. So that's what I've kind of, taken with me to all these various places I've been and things I've done. And it's provided quite a unique reference point, as you said before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's lacking now is, at least my observation is, we've become too specialised in a lot of areas. Obviously we have to have specialisms and we have to have people focusing and doing PhDs and researching on specific topics, but there's definitely a link that's been lost in that sort of strategic overview.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be people now, there needs to be a profession, and I think the landscape urban design kind of area is where that sits. Traditionally it would have been more architecture, but I think, and planning, but I think it's probably changed slightly, and someone needs to sit in between all of these professions and sort of tie everything together. And there's a big emphasis on community engagement and all that type of thing, which is where there's a huge opportunity for an emerging profession to kind of pool a lot of these resources and host that kind of discussion of how we actually integrate all of these things. Because if we don't, we end up in a very difficult position where we have really nice fluffy bits and lots of utilitarian stuff, and actually it's how we merge the two that's really important and where we're going to see massive change. So that's kind of the route I've taken.
I think you're far too humble, actually. Describing yourself essentially as a jack of all trades, master of none. But I've watched your career with great admiration. Especially we sort of took very different routes after school, but sort of kept in touch, sort of kept an eye on each other on social media, and I've been blown away with sort of what you've achieved. Speaking very honestly, and am I right in thinking you've spoken in European Parliament?
It wasn't really Parliament. It was, although there was, I can't remember their names, there were some people from the Commission there, I think. So I've been very, very lucky. I put a lot of it down to luck and frustration. Like a lot of people ask what drives you. And at one point I was thinking, maybe fear of the future. I wanted to try and make a better future. I've got a kid on the way, just got married. I want to build as good a future for my family as possible, and and general people as well. I want humanity to thrive, which is obviously a driver. But actually, a lot of it is I get very, very frustrated, and I use my rage to kind of to drive me forward. And that's got me to a lot of interesting discussions and places because, again, as we sort of said earlier, my attitude is, well, I'll just do it. If things are not being done, why are they not being done? They can't be that difficult. Let's just get on with it. And basically, I started complaining about stuff. I complained an awful lot at university, and I complained at various things. And in the end, I decided that actually one of the best ways to make a difference is actually, as I say, just do it. So I joined various organisations. Actually, I joined the Woodland Trust, put together a huge project called the Tree Charter. It brought together over 80 organisations, and I joined that on their student council. And there were a few things I thought were not being done quite right and I didn't quite agree with, and they sort of upgraded me from the student council to the professional steering group, and I ended up representing landscape and the environment on it alongside all these other organisations that were specialist, just to provide an alternative view really. And that was where it really kind of dawned on me that we need this kind of broader view, because a lot of people are so focused on their subject they miss the bigger context, and you can't just have one thing. It's how do we knit all of these things together. And I always say, the biggest value in landscape is how, our job is to articulate the narratives of other professions. And it's so important at the moment that we do start doing that and we do start going forward together. And then from there, I was appointed as one of the directors of the project, in the space of about a year or so. So I was sort of involved with the legacy and how we sort of see it forward. And I've stepped down from that now to focus on other things. But alongside this, I joined sort of my local branch of the Landscape Institute, which is a professional body for landscape architects. I then was elected as the first non-chartered member of the board of the profession, and I've been there for 4 years now. And whilst on the board, I was appointed as the UK delegate to the World and European Councils for Landscape Architecture. So I've been really fortunate enough to be able to go to some of these World and European Council meetings in Singapore, Norway, Turkey. There was one in London. Obviously, the most recent ones have been cancelled, but they would have been in Malaysia and Iceland and all these places. So I've taken a place at all of these discussions. And because of these various roles, I've been to Westminster a few times. I've had breakfast at Westminster once on the terrace with all these various people. And that was to talk about forestry and the future of forestry. I've been to some on the future of the common agricultural policy and how do we approach that. And I've been to some others with planners and how do we plan the cities of the future? What are the challenges? And one of the big things that came to me there was actually a lot of the plans and the policies are not really being implemented. And the big problem is there's not this, again, to me, it seems there's a link missing, which falls down to the landscape profession, to kind of fall into this gap and oversee a lot of what needs to be done and bring a lot of these things together to try and tie all of this stuff up, because a lot of it gets missed or it becomes fragmented between lots of different professions and the point gets missed and you sort of tick boxes but you don't actually develop this cohesive kind of strategy, especially when there's larger developments or complex developments. And a lot of what we can be doing can really improve the environment and the planet and living conditions for people and public health and all this type of thing.
Yeah, and I think that sums up really nicely that this is a joint effort from everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are sort of the people who are doing really hardcore research in PhD groups, but unless you're able to have the people and the teams around you and the expertise from all these different areas in order to implement it for the wider good, then that research goes nowhere.
Yeah.
So this is why I think it's amazing what you're achieving as well, and why I've kept an eye on sort of what you're up to, because you're the same age as me?
Yeah.
27?
I'm 28.
You're 28.
Same school year.
So yeah,
a little bit ahead of you.
It's remarkable that we're sort of, I think it's remarkable that we're sort of doing things and we're able to do these things with relatively less life experience in the grand scheme of things. But no, it's so cool, and it is going to be a team effort with everyone.
It is, and I think this is the thing. To be critical of a lot of the industries and people I've met, there's very much there's a lot of egos, I think, across all the professions. And I think the advantage of youth, whilst I do have quite a bit of an ego, I think that I am humble enough to look at these things and go, well, actually, is this the best way we approach this? And I think that is something that's starting to change. The barriers that kind of created these silos in the past really are starting to, become much more permeable. And I think it's becoming much clearer because we're sort of realising the complexities that there are, and that there isn't really anyone to no one can tackle all of them. That we have to work together. And I talk a lot about landscape being key. I'm not saying it's the most important. I'm just saying there is a place that's missing for someone to come in and design a solution, and it's just not being done at a large enough scale. And incorporating things like ecology, hydrology, landscape character, species, all of this type of thing, and people as well, communities, and that's what we really need to focus on.
So I'm going to turn the tables on you now. You've asked me about what our timelines are. When do you think we're going to have that kind of solution? Is this a near term, sort of within 5 years, or is this a much longer term to bring everything together?
I'm very, very optimistic at the moment because there's a lot of change. A lot of people are anti-Brexit. I think Brexit has a huge opportunity for the environmental sector because one, we've got to show the Europeans bloody how it's done, and two, which I joke about, but seriously, it's true. There is an element of competition, and I think a lot of the politicians, at least that I've met, have kind of had this air of we've got to bloody do something to pull it out the bag, because the other thing, the government's got nothing to hide behind now. I think that's going to have more credence than a lot of us realise down the line, that they don't have anywhere to hide behind and they've got to kind of like pull the fingers out and get on with it now. And from that, there's a lot of changes that are happening. So one of the really big ones is common agricultural policy reform. And there's a huge amount of talk about it being public money for public good. That's going to completely change the way we approach agriculture, which represents 70% of the UK. Land area is a huge, huge amount. And that's going to completely, make us have to rethink farming. How do we approach these things? What do we actually want from the landscape? How's it going to work? And now there's biodiversity net gain, which is coming in, which is focusing more on the urban area, but it affects any development pretty much, where we have to leave the environment in a better state than when we started. And it seems like a no-brainer, but it used to be no net loss. We can't leave it in a worse condition than we found it. And actually enhancing it makes a lot of sense. So things like that and the urban greening factor have huge potential. They still need a lot of work. There's still a lot of things around that need to be resolved. but they're going to play a massive role. Urban greening factor in London, actually both of them, they both mean you're pretty much going to have green roofs on pretty much any building to be able to achieve the targets. And the biodiversity net gain basically means, unless you've got a huge area, you pretty much can't degrade it, because the penalties for degrading it are huge. And that means that to actually put it back is quite a challenge, and you've got to make it much greener, much more eco-friendly than it was. And all of this stuff makes sense. You want homes, not houses. You want people to have a nice place to live, as much as you want a healthy environment. And it means we can start putting things back. And if we start putting things upstream, we can help mitigate water pollution before it reaches the downstream areas and reduce flooding and all this type of thing. So there's huge potential in both those areas. And also public health. COVID again. Some of the good things to come out of COVID is there's going to be a huge look at mental health and how we approach health generally. And there's preventative healthcare is a huge growth area. We were talking about it before the podcast started, and there's been a big study in the borough of Barnet, and I could get my figures wrong here, but they estimated the maintenance of all of the green infrastructure, so all the trees, the plants, the grass, the parks, everything cost the borough about 72 million. I think it's over a 20-year period to maintain. But the return over the same period is 1.2 billion, and that's huge. Primarily in public health benefit. So actually, when we're talking about the NHS and how we approach things going forward, actually a huge part of it is city design and how we design the environment. We've got to start putting these systems in and designing stuff better to reap the benefits down the line. We've got to think 20, 30, 40 years ahead. We should be looking at 2030, we should be looking at 2050. What do we want to have then, and how do we get there?
Absolutely.
And that conversation is starting to happen, and people get it now. The economics is there. It wasn't there even just a few years ago when I started uni. It wasn't really there, but now it is, and everyone's sort of going, oh, actually, we've got to seriously approach this. And you've got cities like Singapore, which are just astronomically leagues ahead. Which are doing some amazing stuff in very, very urban environments. And we just have to, take their lead and sort of see what they've done and really start to make a difference. And you've got examples like Costa Rica, and I was very fortunate. I've been on a couple of international tours. I did one of New England in North America, looking at how they'd sort of regenerated the landscape, and they were managing the landscape there. And then I did one in Costa Rica of how I think they went from something like 18% forest cover, which is not far from where we are, and they're now at 70-something%, and they based their whole economy around that.
That's huge.
But all of it stemmed pretty much from public money for public good, although it was under a different guise. They funded a lot of that through water. They realised they had a huge potential for hydropower. Trees transpire and produce water. They're a rainforest, they need trees for that, and they enhance the environment. So they went tourism, hydropower. How do we get that? Well, let's become a super green country, get people to come here and look at a huge amount of biodiversity. It's got, I can't remember the percentage, but it's got a huge proportion of the world's biodiversity there. So they focused on that green economy, realised they could produce energy from hydro. So they put the two together and they developed the economy based on that pretty much. And now they've regenerated a huge part of it, and they also brought it into more sustainable land management to help the people. They didn't just they tried saying you can't cut down any trees, which is what you often think. This is the challenge with the environment. There's no clear-cut way. There's so many different routes you can take to do it. It's not always the most obvious. They sort of, originally I think they said you can't cut any trees down. But then what does everybody do? Because they live off the land. It's essentially a third world country. So everyone carries on cutting down the trees and growing pineapples. So actually what they did was they said, the water the trees produce, you'll be paid for. So they suddenly had an incentive to generate income from the land. And there's a huge opportunity to do that with public money for public good. If we change it from owning land and just being given money because you own land or you grow whatever, actually if we give you money for the services you're providing, and we know those services have huge value, there's a huge opportunity to regenerate. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years we could see a massive shift in how we approach the environment. It just has to flow down, and everyone has to realise what's being done and how to do their part.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that, it's very complex. It's not as easy as just saying, oh, we're going to do this, but you've got to have policy, you have to have the technology, you've got to have the implementation processes, the infrastructure ability, but also there has to be a lot that the public can get behind. So one of the things that sort of I have real hope behind the company is that we're going to be able to improve the public's perception on CO2 utilisation techniques. Because at the moment, people talk about sort of sequestration.
It's a big bad guy.
Yeah, exactly. It's this looming shadow, sort of, sequestration. Rubbish. And I really hope that we can sort of not, I guess it is sort of like a re-education of the perception of this kind of technology. And that will hopefully drive the changes that we want to see.
That's it. No, I think that's
in both of our fields.
Definitely, and that's why we set the podcast up, really, is to try and raise the profile of what's actually going on, because you don't hear the good stories and the amazing stuff that is actually being done behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
And if we're going to tackle these problems, as we've already pointed out, we're both quite young in our careers. I like to think we've both made a big difference already, and we're going to do hopefully some incredible things in the future. Fingers crossed. But we need more people. There's not enough people going into these professions, and part of it is reaching out, saying actually, you can do this stuff. It's not something that you have to reach the end of your career to do. There's an amazing opportunity, and a lot of these professions are crying out for people.
Absolutely.
A bit of innovation, a bit of young blood, huge opportunities for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to end on. I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, absolute pleasure having you.
Thank you for having
thanks
me.
for coming up, and let's catch up in a year or so and see how it's going. I think.
See what's happening. Yeah, no, absolutely, and I look forward to that.
Brilliant. See you then. This episode has been brought to you by our sponsor, Beans Accountants. As it's important to remember, sustainability doesn't just relate to the environment, it relates to your finances as well. That's why we switched to Beans Accountants. Beans operate on a package system, so you always know where you stand. We halved our accountancy costs by moving to them, and one of our associates reduced theirs by over 2/3. And with free tax advice and support, you can't go wrong. So make sure you check out Beans Accountants in the description below. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're interested in finding out more about what we have coming up, why not check out our trailer, which you should be able to see here, or in the description below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share to friends and colleagues who may be interested in what's going on in the environmental world. And a huge thank you to our sponsors Vectorworks and Beans Accountants, and our incredibly kind supporters Gillian Goodson Courses and the Birmingham Botanical Gardens, where we filmed this episode. Thank you very much. See you next time.